All right, how is it going, everyone? Welcome to another episode of Forward Thinking Founders, where we're talking to founders about their companies, their visions for the future, and how the two collide. Today, I'm very excited to be talking to Rahul Raina, who is one of the co-founders of TRM Labs. Welcome to the show. How is it going?
Hey, Matt. Thanks for having me. It's going great. How are you?
I am doing fantastic. I have a couple of interviews today, and the conversation has been so good, and it makes me super stoked for this conversation. So I'm ready to roll. And with that, let's just kind of dive right into what you're working on. Can you give everyone an idea of what TRM is?
Yeah, so at TRM, we build software that prevents money laundering and fraud for cryptocurrencies. So our customers are basically, banks, exchanges, basically any financial institution that's required by law to make sure that the money that's flowing in and out of their systems are clean. And when I say clean, I mean that it hasn't been, sourced via things like child trafficking, weapons trafficking, narcotics, etc. And so as our customers are either directly engaging with cryptocurrencies or facilitating the buying or selling, or indirectly exposed to cryptocurrencies via their customers, they need a tool like TRM to help manage and mitigate that risk. And so, we basically help our customers manage and mitigate the risk associated with cryptocurrencies.
So I want to dive into who are the types of customers that you have today. And I think something I'm also very interested in is as cryptocurrency grows, as we're still in the infancy years, who do you imagine your customers will be tomorrow?
That's a question that we think a lot about in terms of like who our customers will be tomorrow. But in terms of like today, a lot of our customers are, cryptocurrency businesses. So businesses that are in some way facilitating, the buying and selling of cryptocurrencies, and then also financial institutions, traditional financial institutions like banks. So those are sort of like our two big customer segments within the financial institution space. Sort of what I would call crypto financial institutions, and then traditional financial institutions. And they're all world. I think we're on at least 3 continents, if not more. And so that's tremendously exciting, and I think that will be a customer base and a customer set that we'll be serving for years to come. To answer your second question in terms of where this goes in the future, I think that story is still to be written. What I'm excited about is in this future where sort of everyone effectively becomes their own bank to a certain degree, or at least in a world where people start doing a lot more peer-to-peer transfer that's truly global and much less decentralized. I think you're going to see people needing to basically, and businesses needing sort of tools to manage and mitigate some of the risk associated with transacting globally in a peer-to-peer manner. So it's almost like, how like you have a Stripe API that like helps make sure you can accept payments. In the future, you might have sort of TRM sort of plugging in to make sure that the money that you're sending and receiving is safe as you're trying to transacting globally with people you may not know all the time.
I think that this is extremely good timing, I guess, in the market, because something that I'm paying attention to a lot is what's happening in media and what's happening in podcasting, where the sponsorship and the advertising model is kind of going a little bit downhill, and it's being replaced slowly with subscription and being funded by your kind of your own community, your own users, and not sponsors or advertisers. I'm curious, like, is this a trend that you spend much or any time thinking about? And if not, what are some trends that you feel like you're latching onto, or not so much trends, but kind of things that are happening in the industry? What are some of these that you're latching onto that you think is going to help build this into a a big company, a sustaining company?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest trend is that crypto is here and it's here to stay, right? Like, you know, and so in the way we look at it is, the biggest trend is that the genie's out of the bottle, and people now have this idea of like decentralized currencies that can be sort of traded globally all over the world. And that's an extremely powerful idea. And there'll be multiple iterations that will happen over time. Bitcoin will not necessarily be the first and last. Um, and that's just a huge shift in the way we think about money and who controls money, who accesses money, and how money flows throughout the economy and the world. And yeah, and I think that's the single biggest thing we're sort of catching on to is really the growth in that trend. And I think the second thing is just the need for people to feel safe, right? And I think that never goes away, and that's sort of like a trend that's been there for a long time. But the fact that people want to feel safe and know that they can trust the people they're dealing with, and whether that's through payments or companies or customers, whoever that may be. And so I think those two trends taken together, which is like this long-term trend of people wanting to feel safe and governments wanting to feel safe, along with this rise in decentralized currencies. I think both of them put together are extremely powerful.
I agree 100%. I'd love to get an idea of what it's been like in the last, well, one, an idea of how long you've been working on this company. The reason I ask is because the last 3 years have been crazy for crypto, and I had another crypto founder come on like 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, Sean Don from CoinTracker, and we were talking all about what's been going on with cryptocurrency in 2017, 2018, and now 2019, and what's the kind of prediction for the future. I'd love to get your idea of what's been going on with cryptocurrency since 2017, and where do you predict it is now, and where is it going as an industry?
Yeah, I think the prediction game is always a hard one. I think all I can say is like we're very early days in sort of the adoption cycle of cryptocurrencies, and the trend only looks to be continuing to go upward. If you discount everything but price, basically, if you discount price, you look at every other metric in terms of people's awareness, people's willingness to buy, governments sort of like thinking about and sort of in some cases implementing cryptocurrencies. I think every other metric has been trending upward. I think I think people always look at price and be like, oh well, price is down and things are different, therefore gonna die. I think if you step back and you say like, let me look behind the curtain, and the trends consistently look positive. I think there was a poll that was done in late 2017 and then in 2019, and it basically surveyed like 2,000 U.S. adults. It was like by Harris poll or something, and basically every awareness across all age groups, from like 65 plus to like 18 to 34. Like purchase intent, like how likely are you to buy Bitcoin next year, was higher, and despite all like the negative price news. And so, and then you sort of merge that with the trends of like people, not using traditional banks and going after like these neobanks, and so people's willingness to sort of adopt new financial products is just at an all-time high, and so I'm optimistic about the future and where this is going.
Yeah, absolutely. I think one other question I have within this sphere is I'd love to hear why you decided to kind of get started with TRM Labs, and hear a little bit of the origin story of the why behind the company.
Yeah. So I guess I'll start with the why we started TRM and specifically why we decided to work on this problem. Esteban, my co-founder, and I basically looked at this problem, looked at blockchain and cryptocurrencies, and realized that this is a truly paradigm-changing technology, right? This idea that people can transact trustlessly all over the world, and have a digital, like whether you want to look at it from a payments perspective, a digital gold perspective, it was a truly novel technology and almost at the scale of the internet, right? Maybe people can debate that back and forth, but almost at the scale of the internet. And so our thing was like, why aren't more people using this, and how do we make sure that this can, like, adoption and sort of innovation in this space accelerates? And as we sort of saw, the 2017 sort of hype, and then the subsequent sort of aftermath, we were looking at, why is this struggling? And the biggest thing we saw was like people didn't have a way to feel safe. They were sort of like, I'm afraid of crypto. Governments were afraid of it. Companies were afraid of it, and then ultimately consumers don't have access to it because governments and companies are not giving them those services. And so we asked ourselves, what will be the highest leverage thing that we can do that would like accelerate adoption of this technology, on which hundreds and thousands of entrepreneurs will innovate on, right? And so for us, after a little bit of soul searching, the answer sort of was like, we have to do something around compliance, to make sure that before governments and companies and consumers will adopt this at any meaningful scale, infrastructure like TRM needs to exist so that people can feel safe and secure in transacting and using cryptocurrencies, and to fully, enjoy all the benefits that it can offer. And so that sort of like was our thinking as to why we decided to work on this problem. It's truly in our thinking, there's a whole bunch of innovation that entrepreneurs are doing in terms of like the protocols and privacy and all this good stuff. And then, what we thought about is like, to complement that, in order to really accelerate adoption, you will need some sort of the infrastructure that we think we're building. We almost view ourselves as like the plumbing, right? The ugly plumbing that needs to happen in order to really drive mass scale adoption. And so that's why we're really excited about working on this problem. Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'd love to hear the why behind companies. So I appreciate you sharing. My last question, specific to TRM, is, if you mentioned earlier, and so did I, that it's sometimes like hard to predict what's going to happen. But I do think it's a lot easier as a founder to just imagine what could be or what could become, less of like predicting, which maybe they're the same thing, who knows. But if you could imagine what TRM will turn into in a decade or 2 decades, I'd love to just get a little insight into the big vision for the company and hear what it could become.
Yeah. I think I view TRM sort of in phases, right? I think so. The near term, I think, is we're serving sort of new crypto businesses and crypto entrepreneurs, and then traditional sort of financial institutions, and really just providing sort of the trust layer on top of what I would say, on top of crypto. And then, and as we go sort of into like past the next 10, 15 years, and you go further out from there, there's going to be a tremendous amount of innovation. And again, that's so hard to predict, but I think generally, and that's going to drive more privacy. And that's going to drive sort of new types of financial assets that more people have access to. And the great question for TRM is going to be, in a world that's more private, in a world that's more peer-to-peer, in a world that's more global, what will sort of trust and security look like, right? How do you find the right balance between maintaining trust and security and safety with sort of the needs of private peer-to-peer value transfer? And I think in that layer, I think companies sort of going to have to go through another sort of innovation spurt where we're going to have to really think about what kind of techniques, tools, and products that we invent for both consumers and businesses, so that in this new that's more private and more peer-to-peer and global, people can still feel safe and prevent, the bad actors from really exploiting and sort of ruining the party for everyone else. And so that's sort of like what I view as the next phase of like truly private peer-to-peer transactions and finding that mix.
All right. I love that. And as mentioned, I do think it's very good timing of what's going on in the market. So congrats on that. Something I want to shift over a little bit to is talking about what you mentioned before we started recording, which is something that you're interested in, something that you've done that you're good at, is building products, and specifically building MVPs, shipping your first version of the product. I want to start high level, and then we can kind of drill down into specific areas.
Yeah.
But kind of to start, let's say you're talking to a founder who has an idea, and they say, I got to hire this many developers and I have this budget, I got to fundraise this much, et cetera.
Yeah.
What would you tell them, and how would you suggest maybe they get started in like potentially a different way, kind of the more way that you alluded to when we first started talking?
Yeah. So I guess I'll answer that with an anecdote. I think we have an article out there. I think that Esteban, my co-founder, he wrote, and it's really good. It basically talks about our idea where, don't pick a product, pick a market and iterate. That's the title. And basically there we go through our story, right? Where we originally started with a game, when Esteban and I first entered the blockchain space. Our mission was always to like find the highest leverage way to drive adoption for crypto. Like a technology is no good if it's not used by a lot of people, if it's not actually affecting like the world at scale, right? Like if I'm providing privacy or if I'm providing peer-to-peer commerce for 10 people, it's almost like irrelevant. What really matters is like billions of people in the most vulnerable areas of the world are using this technology. And so when we first started, we actually started with a game, and our vision with this game was, we're like, everyone's doing crypto, and but they're doing it wrong because they're trying to like go through crypto by speculation and finance, which is, by definition exclusionary, because not everyone has money to speculate and gamble. And two, it's scary, right? Like who wants to like think of this as money, right? Like at first glance. And so when we first started in the sort of like blockchain space, as our entrepreneurs, we were already interested, back in 2015 or 2013 time, like just as like investors and things like that, but just truly as entrepreneurs in the space. We started, in 2018, and we started as a game, and the idea was to say, what if we built a game? It's like Pokemon Go for crypto, right? So instead of catching, Pokemon, you're catching sort of crypto collectibles and tokens. And the idea was that you wouldn't even have to know that that you were playing with crypto. All you knew that you were playing a really, really fun game. And we basically wanted to, and the broader vision behind that was I wanted to put a crypto wallet on every phone, like similar to like what Microsoft wanted to do with like, we want to put a personal computer in every home. Like our vision was we want to put a crypto wallet on every phone. And the most viral way to do that was through a game that makes it engaging, makes it easy, and then we can slowly incorporate crypto, other crypto use cases into it. And the way we decided to like see if this was like even a compelling idea, and going back to the original point around MVPs, was like we actually just like we like validated like would people like the first, we have to sort of like validate our riskiest assumptions, right? That's generally the framework that, I try and use at TRM, and we try and use at TRM. And then I sort of, when I talk to other founders, I encourage them to use as well. Is like, what are your riskiest assumptions, and how can you sort of de-risk them in the cheapest and fastest way possible? So our first assumption is like, will people even want to get out of bed for crypto, right? Like, if I'm going to have a Pokemon Go game, I need people to move. Like, will people move for crypto? And so what we did was we had an experiment in Berkeley where we like basically collected, we put up this landing page. We're like, hey, like, we're doing this like flash sale, or like this drop, like we call it an airdrop, somewhere in Berkeley, and at some time you'll get a text like sign up. And all we used was Zapier, Twilio, and probably like $5. And I think we ended up getting like a few hundred people sign up, and then 60 people sort of like engage. And we had like this airdrop, and I think we had like 20 or people show up when we like randomly in the middle of an afternoon on Berkeley's campus sent everyone a text via Twilio and said, hey, we're doing a drop. And we saw people, and the stories were incredible. Like, people were like sitting in bed watching Netflix, got out of bed for this. We had someone who was like on the way to the library, like step out. We had a person like skip class. Basically, was like, oh, this lecture's boring, I'm just gonna go check this out. And so that was like, oh wow, we just validated like our assumption, like people will get out of bed for this. There's something here. And so that's just one example of like, how, instead of like building an MVP and going to Envision and hiring a designer and all this other stuff, you can sort of validate some of the riskiest assumptions very cheaply, in order before you even like build your MVP. So like, I almost call it the pre-MVP. Like, before you even build an MVP, right? You need to know what to build, and there's a lot of like validation that you can do, a lot of de-risking that you can do. It doesn't require a lot of money, and I think people, if they spend just a little bit more time thinking creatively, will learn a lot.
So let's say someone's listening to this, they heard that and they did their pre-MVP and they've mitigated some of their risk, and they have some assumptions that they've almost proven, and the only way to fully prove their assumptions, or at least to a point, is to put something out into the atmosphere, into the the interwebs, and have people try it. When does an MVP need to be like an actual product? Well, actually, let's back up. So MVP, minimum viable product. Is there a version of an MVP that isn't actually enough of an MVP to validate assumptions? Can you go too light on an MVP, or is it not possible to go too light on an MVP?
No, I think an MVP is, as long as it helps you prove or disprove something, right? I think it's good. I mean, an MVP can be super targeted, right? It can be like, hey, I want to like I just want to like prove or disprove like one key characteristic that I'm relying on. So say, for example, you are trying to like have this like loyalty program with like all the different like restaurants in Denver, right? And you're like, there are a couple ways you can do the MVP. You could actually like go build a product, right? Or you could just literally, give out gift cards, right? And as long as like, and say like, hey, would you sign up for this service? And like, we give you a gift card every time XYZ users sign up with us. And all they have to do is maybe use some coupon code. It's like very unsophisticated. And then you may not maybe retain your customers, and it may turn out that the customer, they felt like there's too much friction, whatever. But you learned something. You learned that, hey, like, there are restaurants that are willing to like sign up and partner with us. This is like a real need for them. Two, you realize that, hey, I think customers are willing to do this, and there are some things that if I improve, I can maybe get them back. And so to answer your question, I really don't think there's like too light an MVP as long as it helps you prove or disprove one small piece of your business. I think what people try and do actually is the opposite, when they try and build an MVP that tries to like do too much and like test too many hypotheses at once, in which case they have an MVP and they have no idea why it failed. Because like, oh, it could have been this, could have been that, could have been this. Versus like if you actually have MVP that actually like is narrower and like tests the riskiest assumption, we can actually iterate faster and actually avoid a lot of cost and pain in the long run.
I like this. So it doesn't exactly matter what the MVP is. It could be a product, it can be a survey, it can be gift cards, it can be a conversation. But the key here is that you need to go in to this test with an assumption that you are trying to prove or disprove, and your MVP has to aid you with the process of proving or disproving. It can't just be random. But other than that, it doesn't exactly matter how light or heavy the MVP is. Is that pretty much what you're saying?
Yeah, exactly. And I think that
Yeah.
look, there are exceptions to the rule, and I think they're, if you're trying to do a two-sided marketplace, like, you know, there are some, edge cases, and you have to figure that out. But even there, I feel like, there's a lightweight version that you can do uh, and learn a lot. Learn a lot of the lessons that you would learn, in 6 months. You can learn in probably 1 month, and that when you're in the MVP stage, it's all about the rate of learning. And anything you do that slows down your rate of learning ultimately will prevent you from building a big business faster.
So this is kind of an interesting kind of point in the process. It's one that I struggle with slightly. Let's say you did your pre-work, you did your pre-MVP, you have your MVP, and you have validated that great, that like, these people need this, that like they have this problem, and they maybe will pay for a solution once it's built.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say is the next step there to great, it's proven? Do you build a product? Do you build a distribution list? Do you keep testing until you're guaranteed to have the right answer? Like, what do you do after that initial validation that you're onto something? Once you're onto something, what do you do?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think Paul Graham has an interesting perspective on this, and his point is basically at every given point, like your role as a founder is to figure out what is bottlenecking your growth, right? So, uh, in your example, if you have this MVP, the question is, okay, well, how do I grow it, right? And what is that bottleneck, right? And so, whether that's through customer discovery or interviews with customers, or just looking at like stats on your app or whatever, uh, you need to figure out what is bottlenecking growth for your app, right? And that could be like, hey, I need more outbound marketing if I'm like an SMB business. I need to get more supply on my two-sided marketplace. Or hey, I need to have reviews. Like people feel like they don't know what they're getting. Or hey, like I need to like my biggest growth market actually turned out that it was in Kenya, and most people in Kenya have an Android phone, and I am only on iOS. Like I need to ship Android and like maybe deprioritize iOS and even shut it down entirely because my biggest growth market is outside, the US. So like it's really hard to say like the one size fits all. Like, but I think the framework would be to say, where is my bottleneck coming from? Like, what is the next thing that I would have to unlock in order for my company to grow a little bit more, and then that will find me another bottleneck, right, in probably another business, and I have to go build that up as well. But basically, once you have an MVP, you're now and just trying to grow. You're just trying to grow, and you're trying to make sure that the MVP you have, it has product market fit.
Okay, I like that a lot, and I want to add something, just because I feel like this area of the company creation process is the area I think I've hung out in the most. I've taken like 3 ideas, or I guess 4 ideas from an idea to decent revenue. I mean, a decent is obviously subjective, but like not, a couple bucks, like actual real revenue. So I feel like I have a couple things I want to add just for people listening. I think once you have your assumptions proven, what I've learned is, and I'd love your thoughts on this, man, but I think that a lot of people build products, they focus too much on product, and then when they are ready to release it or launch it, they don't really have anyone to launch it to, or no one knows that that it exists. So what I've done in the past is, while I'm doing my user interviews and testing assumptions, I'm simultaneously building a distribution list. So when I do have something that's like ready to go, I have people to tell it about, because the worst thing is when you have a product to launch it, or to have it ready to go but have no users, no distribution. So that's one thing that's worked well for me. I just wanted to mention, in that, like, you got to have distribution as well as something to share, which is a product. So cool. So let's a couple more questions in the realm of building MVPs and the earliest stages of a startup. Do you have any thoughts or opinions on this no code movement? And do you think it impacts the building of MVPs or just the product development in general? I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on that.
The low code, no code sort of.
Yeah, like the low code, no code, like the Webflow, the MakerPad. I feel like there's a growth in actual platforms that allow you to build pretty complex apps without needing to know how to code. And I think it's only happened in the last couple of years to have these complex of apps. So if that's something that you're kind of paying attention to, would love to dive in. If not, that's totally cool.
Yeah, no, look, I love it, right? I think the more people that can express their creativity, and this is also the ethos of crypto, right? Like, code and the ability to know how to code, arbitrarily sort of limited the people that can express their creativity, at least with technology. And I think this is incredibly empowering to have these low code, no code tools, because it allows more people to get in the game.
Definitely.
Skills, have the creative ideas. And so I think it's incredibly powerful.
This is a topic I've talked about with a couple of people on the podcast. So I want to dive into the fact that it allows to get more people in the game. So let's say no code tools allow 20 or 30 or 40% more people to build products that developers can currently only build. Do you think that something potentially, do you think becoming a developer, like a full stack developer, going to school or going to a boot camp, do you think that will be potentially less necessary because no code tools will become so advanced? Or do you think that being a developer is still going to be really important and there's still going to be a prime need for developers in the future?
Yeah. In my mind, becoming a developer, going to engineering school, and there's sort of two things, right? One is it teaches you obviously the raw skill of ints and strings and the nuts and bolts of sort of coding. But I think more importantly, it teaches you how to think like a programmer, how to problem solve, how to break down a large piece of problems into smaller atomic units. And I think so I think there's one piece there, which is I think that just going through some of these boot camps and becoming a better thinker will ultimately make you a better user of the low code, no code tools. And then two, as you communicate with your team of engineers, because at some point you will be using your own tech, it just makes you a better communicator as well, because you can empathize and then also empathize with your team, but also more importantly, see the full potential of where technology could even take you. I think a lot of people that necessarily haven't, coded before might be wary, be like, oh, I don't want to do this whole tech thing. It might be too hard. It's not worth the investment. Versus if you're sort of familiar and you see the power of technology, it's incredibly sort of empowering for you as a leader, a non-technical leader in your organization, to sort of contribute and be an advocate for more adoption of technology and tech services. I think that's number one. And I think number two, in terms of like will coding jobs go out of business? I think the answer is no. I think that you will see a redistribution of some of the lower skilled jobs outside the United States, and you've already seen that. But that's good for the world as a whole. But I don't necessarily see engineers going out of business anytime soon.
All right, that is a great way to kind of wrap up the specific MVP building section of the podcast. And I just have one more question for you before we hop off. And the question is, how can the forward-thinking founders community help you? You got all these people listening that are like, by now they're trained to like know for this question, and they're really willing and ready to help. So what's an ask you have for the community?
Yeah, I think the first thing is for all the founders that are out there, I encourage you to stick with it. The more creative founders we have solving real problems for people helps make the world better. So my first ask for you is to not give up and keep pursuing your dreams. The second is a more selfish ask. We're hiring. So if you're interested across engineering and operations, we're hiring. So if you are interested in sort of the future of crypto and future of finance in the global economy, shoot me a note. It's Rahul at trmlabs.com, or you can find me on Twitter as well.
All right. Thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. I feel like we went all over the place and I learned a ton, all the way from cryptocurrency to building MVPs. So thanks for coming on, and I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for having me.